What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So it's that time again, we do a lot of videos about like the development of champions and just like some of the decisions that Riot made that don't really get released into the game. And over time, we develop a library of research and all that stuff, and there's just a couple of abilities that, really stand out amongst the others that are just so much more cooler, crazier, and generally just more awesome. And it's really fun to take a look at these super cool abilities that didn't make it into League of Legends and just show them off and just talk about, the design space that Riot likes to explore, as well as, analyze the abilities. And it's not entirely impossible that some of the abilities might actually show up in the game on a different champion somewhere in the future. It's definitely not impossible, and it's really cool to guess at like what might work and take a look at what could have been really. And these are the best of the best, the most exciting, the most interesting abilities that didn't make it into League of Legends. And just before we start, I'm really proud to announce that this video is sponsored by Crunchyroll. So, I've actually been watching anime on Crunchyroll for a couple of years now, way before I was ever sponsored. So now that I actually am sponsored, I'm really happy and honestly just proud to be able to promote their site. They're definitely my favorite place on the entire internet to watch anime by far. They've got great 1080p quality with good subtitles, no lag, and of course no ads. And one of my favorite shows that I've been watching recently definitely has to be Re:Zero. It's actually really hype right now, and I started watching it because a couple of viewers actually suggested it to me on Twitter, and I definitely have to say that it has been super worth it, and the show is just super hype right now, and there's just, every time a new episode comes out, it's just all over social media, and it's just really exciting to keep up with a show like that, and I definitely recommend it to anyone looking to start up a new anime. But you know what, you don't have to take it from me, because if you sign up at crunchyroll.com/Jeremy or at the link in the description, you can get 30 days of anime absolutely for free. That does get you full access to the site, so you don't have to take my word for it at all. You can just check them out and decide for yourself if you like it or not. And without further ado, let's jump right into the first ability. So first up, we have something that was originally going to be on Elise, with an ability that would have gone on either her W or her E, and we found out about this one from Ghostcrawler's Q&A stream. And apparently when Elise was being developed, she once had an ability where in human form she would throw out this web in a cone that would hit like a group of enemies and then tie them together into a web and then cause the targets caught in that web to actually share damage. So if she hit 3 enemies with her web and then someone came along and bursted one of the caught enemies, both other people caught in that web would also take the same damage as well, which is actually kind of just insane because most of the strong burst in the game is balanced by just being a single target effect, and this kind of thing turns anything into an area of effect ability, and this honestly would have just been crazy powerful and really imbalanced. But they never really wanted her to be a character that was like support focused. Like, this ability didn't really work with her playstyle because it was really focused on just like setting up for allies, She also, at the time when she had this ability on her kit, she didn't have repel at all. She was like a completely different champion. During this time, she also had a passive that worked sort of like a singed poison trail while she was in spider form, which left like a trail of silk behind her. And when she turned back into her human form, that trail of silk would then turn into impassable terrain, so she could kind of block people out from an area or control where they move. And although she could also walk on that sort of like web terrain herself, for someone who's meant to be a mage assassin type of character, those abilities just didn't really make sense at all with her design goals, so they were scrapped in favor of the more proactive kit. Second up, we have an ability that was actually once in the Black Market Brawlers game mode. So, if you ever played Black Market Brawlers when it was out, there was an item called Trickster's Glass, which lets you copy an allied champion so that the enemy team thinks that you are actually that champion, which was really hilarious, and it was just a really funny flavor kind of thing for the game mode, and it was a pretty clever way to trick people. And Riot actually ended up trying out a similar ability on LeBlanc for her upcoming rework, specifically a little bit of an altered version of this effect where she would swap appearances with an ally. So she wouldn't actually copy the appearance like the Trickster's Glass would. Her ally would actually start to look like LeBlanc, and she would look like her ally. And this version ended up being scrapped completely because they didn't think that the gameplay would hold up over time, and it would kind of constantly have to be updated to just deal with so many changes to the game in terms of like the code and the infrastructure, which is honestly kind of a shame, but unfortunately cool stuff does tend to get scrapped for reasons like that quite frequently, and as a result, the ability was cancelled. Ezreal also once had a pretty trippy ability considered for him once when he was in development, and it was kind of just thought of because the design team likes to try out, weird and just honestly innovative ways to start doing different types of skill shots and stuff. And the idea for Ezreal was that he would get kind of like this reverse skill shot effect almost, where instead of firing a shot towards the enemy, what he would do is he would cause a portal to appear behind the target that would then fire a projectile towards Ezreal from the location of the portal. So you could click and place the portal just like any other normal targeted ability, and then you would shoot out a skill shot from the portal that would shoot towards Ezreal. And it's pretty hard to think about how this kind of ability might work on Ezreal from like a flavor perspective, but it could actually work on someone else. And this is the kind of ability that could, could definitely be coming in the future. And it, it would have been a little bit like maybe Echo or Ari's Q, where the skill shot kind of like returns and bounces back so they can try to get position and get the hit off and land the skill shot. And it's actually a really cool way to do a kind of skill shot. And apparently it felt really great when it was pulled off successfully, but the ability was a little bit too complicated and didn't entirely work or make sense on Ezreal thematically. Up next, we have a pretty crazy ability that was tested out for the original Zilean rework, actually. Or I guess it's like the update thing. I don't know if you could necessarily call it a rework, but, back when Zilean's kit was pretty significantly changed. And Riot Zephyrus mentioned that they tried to give Zilean a more literal sense of just time control to Zilean by essentially giving him like this slowing field effect that would actually affect projectiles. So if you think of Jace's gate, but then instead turned into like an area of effect, and then if an enemy fired a projectile through it, like an Ezreal Q or something, the enemy's projectile would get slowed down through the zone and be, a lot easier to avoid. But then at the same time, allied projectiles would also be sped up, so they would hit a lot faster, kind of like a Nidalee Spear, for example. There's crazy ways to abuse something like that, Blitzcrank Hook even. So it was kind of just an interesting way to interact with skill shots. It would interact with your allied skill shots as well as your opponents, which might have been the only ability to ever have done that. So it was definitely a pretty interesting design, but it ended up just not working out. Alright, so this next one's a little bit more complicated, but fortunately it was actually explained pretty well in a quote from Riot Zilius, who was one of the original champion designers, and it's kind of like the idea of an ability based around false choices. So essentially the idea is that you give a player like a few gameplay choices that all kind of look correct, but in the sense that one of them is wrong. And the example they gave for an ability that worked like this was something that they tested on Karthus, which was a little bit similar to Karthus's wall, but instead, if you touch the wall as an opponent, instead of getting slowed and taking some armor shred and stuff, you would get damaged and knocked towards the person that created the wall. And this is a great example of an ability that didn't work out because of the design, because it really just wasn't a good ability at all for the game because of this whole idea of what they call a false choice. Essentially, you would never ever want to go towards the wall. Like, you would never want to actually interact with the wall knowing that you'd just get damaged and knocked towards Karthus. And it wouldn't have been so bad if Karthus had a way to like knock you into the wall or to force you into that type of situation, but without it, the ability actually ends up just being really awkward because it creates the situation where you as the Karthus player really want people to get hit by the wall, but as an opponent, you literally just never ever want to walk into it. So it creates a very awkward gameplay pattern that overall just isn't very healthy design at all, and as a result, the ability was scrapped. Next up is a pretty crazy idea that came from Riot Ezreal while he was designing Nasus actually, and the idea was that he would have some kind of like a soul system that would give him a completely different resource at the time, which was souls. His spells would cost souls to use, and he could generate souls in certain ways using certain abilities as well. And Ezreal said that on Nasus it ended up being pretty much a horrible failure, but in all honesty, it's actually a pretty good idea, and it's cool to see how this kind of thing essentially was resurrected on Thresh. Resources for champions are pretty simple when it comes to costs for abilities. Like, either they have mana and they pay mana, or maybe they can sustain and spend health, or they regenerate energy and they can spend energy, or maybe they just don't have any resource at all and only use cooldowns. And we've never really seen a champion that has like its own resource that they have to generate in order to actually use their abilities. Kind of like an ammo system, but in something more applicable than just auto attacks or specific abilities, like an ammo system that affects the entire resource bar, that affects every single ability. So it's a little bit difficult to say if it would work or not, but it is a pretty interesting idea that could maybe lead to some really intense gameplay where you kind of just like desperately want to generate the resource you need to cast like that game-changing ability at like a crucial moment in a fight, or to outplay your opponent or just something like that. And the management of that kind of resource could be a pretty interesting way to design a champion, but it definitely wasn't the way to go for Nasus. Next up, we have a pretty crazy ability that was actually tested for the original Rengar rework. So not the one coming up right now, but the one that was released around Season 4 or so. I believe it was patch 4.5, and it would probably have been the most broken ability on our entire list today. And Riot was once asked about utility ultimates, and Riot's been releasing a lot more champions with utility ultimates recently, but not on assassins. And Riot Repertoire said that they actually tested a utility ultimate on Rengar where he could actually stealth his entire team around him. And this ability, as a result, was a bit of a failure in two ways. First off, Rengar is supposed to be a very selfish character and, good at doing things for himself, and his team kind of just benefits from him in that way because Rengar succeeds rather than him trying to help out his friends. And at the same time, giving stealth to champions that are not at all balanced for stealth at all is actually just flat out insane. Riot Repertoire gave the example of Annie just being able to straight up walk up to someone in stealth and then Tibbers burst someone down. That gameplay is just crazy. It's so powerful. And yeah, I definitely don't even want to play against that one, that's for sure. That is just insane. For our next ability, we're looking at something that was originally a part of Quinn's rework, and she had a pretty interesting ability tested for it, where she would kind of get her own suppress effect, actually, similar to a Warwick ultimate almost. The ability was kind of like a desperation tactic from Valor, where if Quinn's health fell to 30% or less, Valor would swoop at the enemy that hit Quinn and just claw at them, suppressing them in the process. And it's pretty crazy to think about, but a suppress on a passive effect like that would actually be pretty insane. And you'd end up being just punished for doing good damage on Quinn, which is a kind of a bad idea unless it had some sort of limitation and stuff, but overall it just wasn't that fun to play against, and as a result got cancelled. Next up on our list, we have an ability from Syndra, and apparently she had a ton of abilities that actually didn't work out in development. And one of these abilities was a version of her ultimate where she could grab and throw enemy champions. Kind of like how her W, grabs and throws minions or maybe her dark spheres, but instead on champions. It was her ultimate, but it was actually pretty crazy. But it didn't really work out for Syndra since she's kind of like a mage caster. She's not really some kind of super crazy disruption champion, but Riot did actually say that they liked the idea, and although Syndra wasn't entirely the right fit, they might revisit in the future, maybe with some slight variations, and it's possible that this is what inspired the design for Tahm Kench's W. And that just about wraps up today's crazy abilities that didn't make it into League of Legends. These were actually really awesome abilities, and this type of compilation takes a long time to put together. That's why we can't really do them more than once every month or so. And I really love bringing you guys these compilation abilities. They're actually probably my absolute favorite type of videos to make, just because they're so interesting, and a lot more research goes into this kind of stuff than you would think. And I would love to see some of these abilities in game, maybe. Some of them not so much, but some of the ideas could definitely work here, because they just weren't necessarily ideal for the champions they were originally designed for, but they do still have a lot of potential. And, definitely let us know which ability was your favorite in the comments below, and maybe what kind of champion you think they go best on. And looks like that's going to be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.